I tried to stand on the frozen ground, shivering in the cold, finding my way in the dark, falling all over the classroom as my eyes tried to heal. It was almost pitch black, and the only light came from a yellow face in the sky. My whole body ached as I crawled towards the grass. I'm half naked, weak and afraid. It's not a natural job for me because I've been a violent, tough person my whole life. But now the truth is out and I can no longer hide behind my tough exterior. Suddenly a bright light appeared that almost blinded me as two corners of the flood came at the same time and rained down on the stadium. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in the middle of the football field. The grass was frozen and dead. It was an empty place, with goals and nets at both ends and even ropes hanging from the four corners. Look! As I looked into the dead silence around me, I saw the voice. The chairs towered over me, reaching into the black sky. Behind the bright lights, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of cruel spectators stared into my cold, lifeless eyes. When I looked for these bad guys, I was paralyzed with fear when I saw that they were wearing clothes most of the time. History. I saw Romans in white shirts, medieval soldiers in armor, 20-something gangsters in pinstripe suits, Octogenarians in shiny shell suits, and many more. At the narrow table, everyone sat silently and motionless, saying nothing but looking at me with unconscionable hatred. I scanned the area for an escape route, but the field was blocked off on all sides by 10-foot grass barriers and impossible to climb stands. However, I tried to stand up. I stood on my feet, but I realized that my legs were supporting my weight, as I fell to the cold ground and buried my head in my hands. After a while, I was brought back to that strange situation when a loud sound rang in my ears, a whistle. I looked up and was surprised to see two figures suddenly appear about 20 meters in front of me. On the right is what looks like a guard dressed in black with a silver ring on his lips. I say lips because the watchman has no skin on his face, just a skull with a large, black hole where the eyes should be. To the left of this cruel bone stood my enemy. His skin was pale, and his hair was stained with dried blood. He wears a white shirt, ripped jeans, and heavy DDM shoes. His foot, I couldn't look into his eyes were now inhuman, burning with hatred, filled with hatred. I watched in horror as Tommy slowly raised his right hand, ran his fingers down his throat, and looked at me with a sadistic smile on his lips. At that moment, the people who were silent before suddenly came to life. Thousands of people stood up and suddenly screamed with anger, looking at me and shouting, "Kill him! Kill him! Beer Stuymargin! Zerups padding! Zerups beer!" The holy terror passed. I walked through my paralyzed body trying to stand up again, but I realized I couldn't. The skull guard blew his second whistle, a whistle so loud and heavy that I could hear it even over the noise of the crowd. Then he raised his knuckles and pointed at me. Tommy took this as a sign and lunged forward in righteous anger, his grin widening. I can't run or hide. I couldn't take my eyes off the attack. Tommy quickly closed the gap, emerging from the frozen ground, footsteps thumping as they came. I braced myself and watched helplessly as Tommy lifted his foot and kicked my head. Pain echoed in my skull. My brain broke when I fell on the hard court. Sadistic chants filled my ears before my entire world went black. I woke up screaming in a cold sweat as soon as I lifted my head from the pillow. The light came on and I turned to see Sally's face. His blue eyes were filled with shock and concern as he spoke. "Oh my God, Carl, what happened? For God's sake, you just raised the baby." Sally angrily jumped out of bed and went to see the 3 babies. Meanwhile, I was hurting as I hummed meekly as she closed the bedroom door. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, dear. I repeated. This is not my first nightmare, and it may not be the last, but no one knows but Sally. Stop, Needle. She knows that my fame will disappear. The year is 1998. He is 25 years old, married and the father of a newborn baby named Alice. I have a good job as a mechanic, a nice house, and a loving family. But that's just the respectable image I present to the world. During the week I am a hard-working man, but on the weekends I turn into a criminal, a gangster, and a terrorist. But those who have not grown up in this culture cannot fully understand this. Football. There are also headhunters from Chelsea, West Ham United's Intercity, Millwall's headhunters Jungle Hacks, and our biggest rival Arsenal's The Herd. Saturday is match day, and while our players are fighting on the field, the company is also fighting on the streets. Things were different in my father's time, in the 1970s and 1980s. Today is a day of football hooliganism, with fights between rival fans in the stands, but disasters such as Hazel caused chaos, and the whole character of the game changed in the 1990s, with seats breaking and entire stadiums being replaced. Security measures have also been improved. It was stated that the police took strict security measures in the event area, and there were CCTV cameras everywhere, in order not to be caught and arrested. Companies need to change their tactics, arrange conversations on the phone, move away from the sight and prying eyes. My father taught me violence, but he passed away a long time ago. But I'd proven myself in battle and had risen to the top of our firm, achieving the coveted position of a top boy. We fought our enemies with fists, boots, kashes, and Stanley knives, often inflicting grievous injuries but not killing our rivals. But sometimes things went too far, as I learned the hard way. Still, back then I thought I was the business. I provided for my family but lived for the adrenaline rush on the weekends, relishing the opportunity to get tanked up and kick the living shit out of my enemies. I believe I could live this double life without consequences, but I was dead wrong. I discovered this in the terrible autumn of '98, when the ghosts of my past began to haunt me. My story begins on a dreary Saturday in October. We are playing away against Coventry. We played out a frustrating goalless draw on grey and wet ground. The match was boring, and we couldn't score at the end because Coventry had no one on their side. The kids and I took the long train back to London, drinking. But as I drank my beer and looked out the window at the darkness covering the towns and villages, I was disappointed and worried. Times like this are the hardest for me because the adrenaline from football and fighting leaves me alone with my thoughts and painful memories. When I sat on the dirty train, I suddenly felt cold and felt as if someone was walking on my grave. After this, the bike's lights flash for a moment, then go out completely, leaving us in darkness with the same light coming from the distant houses and buildings we were so fast on. The boys grumble and swear while playing cards, and end sarcastically when the game is interrupted. It was the perfect end to a great day, but I was cautious and my instincts were telling me something was wrong. I looked at the dark road and saw the shadow of a man standing at the end of the wagon. I couldn't see his face, but I knew he was looking directly at me, and my sixth sense told me he had a bad heart. Who is this? I didn't shout at anyone in particular. What is a boss? He's my best friend and number 2 in the company, Dan replied. That bad guy is there. I couldn't take my eyes off the intruder. What is it? What are you talking about? Dan asked in surprise. But I don't listen. Instead, I stood up, clenched my fists, and angrily walked down the hall to confront the intruder. "Hey, do you want a friend? Let's invite you," I shouted. The man did not speak or even move. He wasn't nervous, but I took a deep breath and took a step forward, ready to attack this mysterious figure. Just then, the train on the other side passed us, and its light shined on the dark carriage for a while, allowing me to see the man's face for the first time. I immediately took a step back in horror and focused on my evil smile. My old enemy. This is Tommy, there is no doubt about it. He had died in a tragic accident a year ago, and yet here he was, standing in front of me, his dark eyes examining me with a sadistic smile. I stumbled back, screaming as I fell to the pavement. When I looked up, I saw Tommy's evil face far away from me, his blue lips parted, and cold saliva running down my forehead. I shouted again, louder this time. But suddenly, the car light came back on, and Tommy disappeared. Dan and the kids ran to help me up. "How are you, friend?" Dan asked. I immediately checked the car to find Tommy, but I couldn't see him anywhere. I slowly regained my composure, as I didn't want to be weak in front of the children any longer. "Yeah," I replied. "I'm fine. Man, I think I drank too much." I quickly scanned the carriage, looking for Tommy but not seeing him anywhere. I slowly regained my composure, not wanting to show further weakness in front of the lads. "Yeah," I replied. "I'm fine, mates. Too much drink, I reckon." The lads shared a laugh, and Dan said, "You been at the magic mushrooms again, Carl?" I laughed nervously, slapping my friend on the shoulder as I took my seat. "Don't worry, mate," Dan added. "Arsenal's in a fortnight. That'll be a proper scrap. Bloody mayhem." The boys all cheered in rowdy agreement, and I forced myself to smile, although secretly it was dreading the derby match and the painful memories that would come with it. My friends went back to their beer and cards, while I raised my hand to my forehead to wipe Tommy's spittle off my skin. I had another nightmare that evening, awaking in the early hours. Thankfully, I didn't wake up Sally on this occasion, instead rising from our marital bed and slowly creeping down the stairs, pouring myself a glass of water as I sat alone in our dark sitting room. The visions of that fateful day had haunted me every night for a year, and the guilt I carried with me was nearly overwhelming. I swear I didn't mean to kill him. Sure, I wanted to hurt the bastard, but not to end his life. Tommy was the top boy in the herd, our grudge rivals and sworn enemies. Boy in the herd, our grudge rivals and sworn enemies. Our fight with the herd was always one of the biggest of the season, and all the lads were pumped up and ready to cause mayhem. We meet the enemy on an abandoned road, screaming with bloody fury as we attack them. I sparred with 3 or 4 members of the pack, pushed my way through the crowd, and headed straight for Tommy. When he saw me, he growled and took a step forward, his eyes narrowed and angry. My adrenaline was pumping, and I lunged forward, landing a right hook. My fist held his jaw still, and despite the pain in my arm, I felt the sweetness of pleasure. I had him hard enough to knock Tommy to the ground. I watched with joy as he fell, but I experienced a rush of pure fear as the back of his head hit the pavement and broke open with a painful sound like an eggshell. I gasped as I looked at Tommy. His child's body was shaking violently and blood was flowing from the back of his head. He glanced up at me in that final moment, his eyes full of shock and fear as he tried to mouth his plea for mercy. But there was nothing I could do but watch as his eyes rolled up into his head and he stopped breathing. I don't know how long I stood there in shocked paralysis, staring down at the dead body of my rival. Part of me still didn't believe it was real. How could this have happened? It was all meant to be a laugh. People weren't meant to die. I ignored the fighting around me and even the sound of sirens blaring as they came even closer. It was Dan, shaking me back to reality as he screamed in my ear, "The Old Bill are coming, mate. We need to get out of here." He dragged me from the scene and we ran, leaving Tommy's corpse lying on that dirty back street like he was nothing more than a piece of rubbish. The police questioned me about Tommy's death. They could have charged me with manslaughter, maybe even with murder. But there was no CCTV, no forensics, and no witnesses came forward. I kept my mouth shut during the interrogation, and they had to release me without charge, and so I got away with it. The lads treated me like I was a hero, but I secretly carried an immense guilt. Tommy has a family, wife and kids, and I took him from them. I've been having nightmares since that day. It begins with a flashback to Tommy's death, but the dream becomes very real and horrifying, leading to the horrors of Hell Stadium. I don't know what this means, but I tell myself that this crime has affected me. My mind is getting better over time. But now I wake up and see Tommy in real life. Am I crazy? Or does it haunt me beyond the grave? I don't know the truth, but I'm so scared and no one can tell me this. Manchester United is leaving. We drove north and the kids drank and sang along the highway. I tried to attend the event, but I couldn't forget the fear that overshadowed me. Manchester United's company is known as the Red Army and is one of the most powerful companies in England. There are also regional rivalries, North versus South, London's big boys versus Manchester's tough guys. In the Thatcher days, my father's team waved wads of money at their northern rivals and openly criticized the economic disparity between the two regions. But times have changed. Inspired by Ferguson, United became a dominant force in the domestic league, winning many trophies throughout the 1990s. But despite our team's disadvantage on the pitch, we as a company will attack them away. Unfortunately, this rivalry is very unexpected. Our best performance from our opponents and United looked very happy with a 2-0 win. When the final whistle blew, all the players were excited and wanted. We met the enemy in an empty car park near Salford Quay. The Red Army, elated with victory, laughed at us as we approached. Suddenly a gun and a bullet pierced the gap. This is the red light that Manchester United fans are firing in our general direction. Luckily, the flare missed our children and hit and killed a car park behind us. My crew is now so angry that they rushed forward like a group of berserkers and attacked the enemy. Bloody violence ensued as people punched. I hated violence that afternoon, so I was not satisfied. I took out the trash when necessary, but other than that, I stayed on the field and watched the bloodbath. Meanwhile, the car continues to burn behind us. I felt the fire on my back, but there was something else. As I slowly turned towards hell, I felt an icy cold run down my spine. A figure was sitting in the driver's seat. There were flames around it, but somehow it didn't bother him. The man turned to look at me, and I knew Tommy was laughing at me again. His eyes filled with hatred, and he started laughing wildly, mocking me in the fire. Suddenly the door opened and the ghoul came out. The flames exploded and made their way. His laughter grew louder and could be heard even in the hand-to-hand combat around me. I didn't say anything. I took a step back as he approached, using all my strength not to scream. But then I heard a new voice from afar, a familiar siren. The next thing I remember, I felt a firm hand on my shoulder and turned to see Dan. His face was bleeding from the heat of battle, and his eyes were wild. "Come on, man, let's go," yell. After a while, we started running. getting away from the more serious situation before the police arrive. Arsenal is at home. The big one. This is the game I've been dreading all season because I know exactly what's going to happen. My whole life was falling apart before my eyes. I can't focus on anything, not to my family, my job, my football club. When I closed my eyes, all I saw was Tommy, the ghost of my enemy who came to this world to take revenge. But no matter how scared I was on Saturday afternoon, I couldn't stand it. I have nowhere to hide. The company organized a meeting at our local bar, the Headless Horseman. We had drinks a few hours before the game started. Students come prepared, equipped with cutters, screwdrivers, and knives. Violence is inevitable, but my heart isn't in it. I drank a few pints of beer in the bar, trying to drown out the words and battle cries of my comrades. But this turned out to be impossible. I asked for permission and went to the bathroom, and when I sat in front of the urinal, I smelled urine. I was drinking when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. Laughing, a terrible gurgling sound came from one of the cabins. When I turned to look under the bathroom door, I saw a pair of black DDM shoes belonging to a man standing in the distance. I reached my limit as my fear was replaced by anger, and I decided to stand my ground. "What do you want from me?" Looks like a man's face to me from behind, I shouted. The man behind the door did not answer, but turned and laughed loudly. I swore at me. I was so angry I ran upstairs and kicked the door open, but saw no one was inside. I was so angry I wanted to scream, but I pulled away from the bathroom and ran away. When I got back to the bar, I ordered another drink. Dane came over and realized something was wrong. "What day is it today, friend?" He grabbed his stool and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." Asked. Instead, I grabbed my friend's shirt and pulled it closed so I could look into her eyes. "Tell me the truth, Dan. Did one of the boys make me drink?" My friend was surprised and confused. "Dude, is there alcohol in your drink? What are you talking about? I'm going to eviscerate the bastard who did this to me." I spat. Dan pulled away from me and placed a firm hand on my shoulder as he answered, "Listen, Carl. We've known each other since school. All the men here are your friends. We are behind you." I nodded, embarrassed by my outburst. "I don't know, Dan. I think I lost it, man. I saw something. I heard something. Do you remember that day?" "What am I doing?" Dan frowned and his expression became serious. "Listen, Carl. The ship is turning. Of course he's sorry he died, but he knows the danger. It was an accident. Man, you can't blame yourself for that." I nodded my head, trying to think of the words to reply. But suddenly Dan's mobile phone started to ring and he held up a finger while he took the call. The conversation was short, but Dan's reaction was instantaneous. "Jesus, mate, that was one of the youngsters on the street. The gunners are coming for us. They're right round the corner." A spike of panic hit me as I realized I faced a new threat. But I wouldn't do so alone. Dan held the soldiers up as the three boys finished their drinks, knocked over the table, and walked out into the street. We arrived in time to see the cows coming around the corner. Apparently they were planning to attack our company at the bar and were surprised to see us waiting for them. However, despite all our efforts, they quickly recovered and attacked our children in the middle of the road. I saw men punching, kicking and stabbing each other in a now famous orgy of violence. But there was something different about this battle than any other, and I saw 6 gunners breaking through the crowd and walking towards me, both of their whole soldered with hatred and shouting, "Kill him, kill him, kill him." Suddenly I realized what was happening here. These are Tommy's friends. They knew I'd killed their top boy and now they were out for revenge. I realized then that I needed to fight. Otherwise, I'd be going home in a box. I clenched my fists and prepared for battle. Fully prepared to fight as 1 against 6, but I didn't need to. Dan was as good as his word. He and the boys moved in to protect me, throwing punches and thrashing out at the 6 attackers, making them pay for their foolish assault. The Arsenal men were badly beaten, slowly retreating under the relentless attacks. Only 1 man made it as far as me, a middle-aged thug wearing a surgical mask and armed with a scalpel. He screamed in fury and charged, but I got the better of him, dodging the attack and lunging forward. I knocked the knife from my attacker's hand and laid into him, punching the bastard again and again until my fists were bloody. My enemy knew when he was defeated as he stumbled back down the street, leaving a trail of his own blood as he went. By now all the herd members were in retreat, the hard men reduced to crying cowards as they fled from our fists and blades. A cheer went up amongst our crew. The enemy had come here to our home turf, and we'd beaten them back. Humiliating, I joined in the celebrations in that moment, crying out in triumph whilst raising my bloodied fists. But my joy didn't last long. I didn't see the bullet until it was too late. The glass bottle was flying through the air, and as he ran, he was stopped by an Arsenal fan. I didn't have time to bend down. The bottle fell on my head, the glass breaking as the shards cut into my skull. I fell to my knees sobbing, blood flowing from my forehead. As we set off, I looked up to see Tommy standing on the pavement, seemingly oblivious to everyone but me. There was still a smile on his lips, and he chuckled loudly, enjoying my pain. But I know this isn't over yet. Tommy wasn't done with me yet. It was still a long way away. This derby match was one of the most exciting matches of the year and ended with our youth winning 3-2 in extra time. But I missed all that because I had to go to E to get the broken glass out of my head and get stitches. The medical staff treated me responsibly but without much compassion. The knees has no time to deal with the corrupt people who make up the system. But that was nothing compared to my wife's reaction. Sally came to see me at the emergency room but didn't stay long. He's totally crazy, and I can't blame him. Look at you. What happened? She shouted. I'm just having trouble in love. There's nothing to worry about. It's not true, she shouted angrily, easily seeing through my lies. You're running around with crazy people pretending to be bad people. I think you'll grow up and grow out of this shit. And when your daughter is born, you'll start acting like a human being. Does the cat have a tongue? She asked sarcastically. Carl, you haven't been yourself or spoken to me for months. I've tried to be patient, Carl, but that's enough. I'm going to take little Alice to live with me, mother and father. When you're ready to be a real man, you can call me. I swallowed. After talking to each other for the first time, Zong raised his head and met his wholesale. I saw disappointment on his face, and I was very embarrassed, and my outward strength melted away as I stammered out an inadequate response. I'm sorry, dear. He turned away. He rolled his eyes, muttered loudly, and then ran out of the hospital. I came home alone, unable to meet Dan and the kids or anyone else. My head still hurts, and I lie down on the bed. But I don't want to close my eyes and fall asleep because I know he's waiting for me in the dark. But it was in vain, because eventually my strength gave out and I fell into the land of nightmares. I walked back into the stadium like hell. A light was shining on me and a bunch of ghoul people were screaming for my blood. The next thing I heard was a joke and I looked up to see the skull-faced referee pointing his bony finger at me. When I saw Tommy charging at me on the field, I didn't even try to dodge or fight back. His smile was wide as he lifted his heavy boots to kick. I felt a sudden, intense pain as her feet came into contact with mine. Skull butt this time, there is something different. Usually a wake up after playing football, but not this time. With great horror, I realized that my head had been thrown out of my body and was now detached and floating in the air. I still remember and know my surroundings as I spun uncontrollably while the Dominaries crowd cheered in pure enthusiasm. My head hit the hard rock on the ground. But my ordeal was not over yet. Tommy ran onto the field and kicked me again, using my head as a football as I dribbled on the field. When he reached the penalty area, he shot me powerfully and sent my head flying into the top corner of the goal and into the back of the net as the crowd celebrated. That's when the nightmare ended, but my night of hell had just begun. When I woke up, I realized I couldn't scream or even move. I was paralyzed, lying in bed without a quilt, breathing harder and harder due to panic. But things got worse. I soon realized I wasn't alone when I managed to move my head enough to see a shadow standing in the corner. I knew who he was before I saw his face. Of course I knew. Tommy came up to me, and before that I had made no progress. Had no ability to resist or even escape. He came towards me, his face showing evil in the light. I don't believe this is my old enemy, and I don't believe him anymore. Everything that happened to you must have come from the depths of hell. His dark eyes looked at my paralyzed body as if it were a piece of meat. Then he opened his dirty mouth and spoke to me in a deep voice. "Good evening, Governor. We haven't seen each other for a long time. I apologize for stopping by unexpectedly. I tried to scream, to shout all the curses in the world, but I couldn't make out a single word. I am at the mercy of the devil, and he knows it. There, my friend." He still held the knife in his hand. "You think you beat me, but you forget that it's a game of two-halves. You're running well in the race, but now I'm going to hit you back." He slowly pulled my shirt, revealing my bare breasts. It exposed the bottom. I couldn't hold it back. I could barely breathe in, and my mind went blind. All my strength and energy was gone, and I could only watch in horror as he lowered it. He started cutting my skin with it, whatever it is, as he continues to carefully move deeper into my body. I thought I was going to pass out, but somehow I opened my eyes and saw the entire process of my own disintegration. It was finally over, and I had to look down at my bloody chest, afraid to see the monster etched into my skin. "It's hot, there you go, mate," Tommy said with a twisted sense of satisfaction. "Everything is ready when the final bell rings. We seem to be running out of time. Don't you like this nice game?" Suddenly I lost control of my voice and cried like a banshee. When fear hit my heart, I went out. The monster in Tommy's form just smiled and said, "I'll see you again, buddy." Then he came downstairs and disappeared into the shadows in the corner of my bedroom. It's been 25 years. It was a hellish night, but I still bear the scars of the attack and the nightmares that continue to haunt me. I am a shadow of what I once was. Sally never returned, and my daughter grew up without me in her life. I haven't been back to the company since. What can I do when I am completely humiliated and emasculated? I haven't been to a football match in a quarter of a century. For many years since then, my life has been miserable, a life filled with fear and shame. I'm afraid to see him wherever I go, Ghost Tommy or whatever takes his form. He's always watching over me, and if he wants, he can enter my nightmares and bring me back to the evil playground of death. The cancer of the game I once loved. My life is full of pain and suffering, and it is a part of me. I want to pass, but I'm still scared to death because I know Tommy is waiting for me in another country, eager to use my head as a football player forever. I can still hear the last words he said to me, "We're running out of time." I see you again, my friend. I know what awaits me after death, and it scares me. My only hope is that there is a God who will have mercy on my soul. My fate is now in his hands.